Thank you, Joseph. Are we live and ready to go, Joseph? We're already moving.
We are on.
Great. Good evening, District 6 neighbors. My apologies for the brief delay. There are always technical difficulties when having town halls. I am Dan Strauss. I'm your District 6 council member. I was born and raised in Ballard. I've lived in Green Lake, Fremont. I was lucky enough to serve on the Ballard District Council as the District 36th representative, and I am pleased and honored to serve you at City Council. First order of business is COVID cases are spiking. This means that you need to wash your hands 30 seconds in duration as many times as possible. I'm going to set a timer for myself just to make sure I don't go over my time because we've got a lot to get to tonight. We had over 500 RSVPs, 200 people are watching us right now on YouTube, and we've received 157 questions. I've made a couple notes that I want to hit because I've put a lot of thought into this evening, and I am going to be speaking extemporaneously. So in addition to this, I'll be taking notes from what the district councils have to present and what our conversation later in the program will be discussing. I want to note that with the state of our union in a tenuous position and experiencing a historic civil rights movement and moment, there are large civic issues dominating our world. And this doesn't mean that any small issue is any less important, whether it's homelessness, parks, potholes. We are in the middle of the beginning of this conversation about in this historic moment with civil rights. And through all of this, I want to create a District 6 that is a place that you can live, learn, work, play, all in our public spaces, and is a place that everyone feels safe. COVID has shifted how we work. We started by opening a district office in my first days in office next to the Ballard Library, having in-person meetings, attending community council meetings, neighborhood meetings, and meeting with people in their living rooms. Now, where we have to be remote and do all of our work virtually, I have been shifting in how I can communicate with you because I still don't want you to have to go out of your way to have your voice heard by City Hall or to have contact with me or know what I'm discussing at City Council. It did occur to me that while we have council briefings each week and I'm constantly reporting out, that's not necessarily accessible to you. So that's why we've begun sharing videos, updating you on my work, and I also want to make sure that everyone signs up for our newsletters that we're sending out regularly. I have been reluctant to be in groups of people and be out in public because the nature of my work requires me to talk to so many different people. And the last thing that I would want to do is be somebody who increases the spread of COVID. At this point, 7 months in of my first term in office, I thought I would have created a few transit lanes, cleaned up some parks, filled a few potholes, and the reality is that no one could have seen these unprecedented times coming. We've received an unprecedented amount of emails in the month of June alone, more so than ever in my decade of public service. The number of emails that we received each day in June was nearly 2,000. We've needed to reschedule this town hall many times because of the many variables that have been impacting our schedule, and I'm really glad to be with you here and now. It's important that we hear from a diverse set of voices, and I'll hope that you'll take the time to listen with an open heart and mind. It's important that we create empathy and understanding of our fellow neighbors, as it's important to have tough conversations. It is important that we have everyone in our community present here on these panels, which is why I have asked for our district councils and our conversation about race from District 6 residents. From here tonight, we'll be hearing from landlords and renters, from lifelong D6ers to new neighbors, from conservative to liberal, because no matter what, these are voices that make up our community. And these are voices that I'm accountable to listening to. And we've structured tonight's conversation so that anyone who tunes in sees themselves in someone presenting or hears their voice represented, because this is an important community conversation. We've not dealt with the issues that we're facing right now for many decades, and I'm here to help facilitate that conversation. With our robust discussion tonight, it's a first step or second step in the right direction, and I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation. We've got a lot of topics to cover in a short period of time, and we know that we won't be able to address every issue, which is why we've invited so many other people to this forum. You can still meet with me individually. While we aren't holding in-person district meetings, I am still meeting with people, residents each week over the phone. And if your question was not answered or you'd like to have a more in-depth conversation, I would love to meet with you. We are right now, for the first time this year, experiencing a short backlog in scheduling our resident meetings, and I'm continuing to meet with people every week. So I'd like to take a short summary of the work that City Council and I'm working on right now. First, I'll talk about Seattle Police Department and the conversations around funding and defunding. We'll be talking about policing later, and I want to be sure that we frame this in an important way, that we are not discussing decreasing public safety. In fact, we're discussing increasing public safety for many people in our community. If defund is a scary concept to you, it is just as easy to say scale down, scale up of programs and policing, because you'll always be able to call 911 and get a response. At the end of this transition, my goal is that you'll be able to call 911 and get the appropriate first responder with the resources that they need to be successful. It's a false narrative to say that because there's not other options available today, change is not possible. Because the worst thing that we could do is set up an organization to receive responsibility for an area of work before they're ready, only to watch them fail and say, see, it doesn't work. There will be accountability and ownership in this changing structure, and the model of service is changing, and change does take time. In other work that we're working on, my first bill, Childcare Near You, is a childcare permitting bill. Land use processes take a lot of time. We started working on this in January, and Childcare Near You makes technical changes to streamlining permitting. It removes costly barriers, and it allows creating childcare near where you work and live more accessible and able to occur, because I have heard so many stories of friends who have to either sign up on wait lists so many years in advance or go out of town to receive the childcare that they need. Again, we're going to have some tough conversations tonight. They're the same conversations you've been having at your dinner table or over your virtual water cooler. And so I'll lay out the framework of tonight's conversation. First, we will hear from our district councils, who will have an opportunity to present some of their work and then ask me questions. Then we will have a community conversation about race in District 6 from members of District 6. After that, I will be taking some questions that have been submitted. Again, over 175 questions have been submitted. So if you'd like to meet with me one-on-one, I'd love to meet with you. I'll meet with anyone. And so from here, I'd like to welcome our our district councils. We will hear from them in alphabetical order: Ballard, Fremont, Green Lake, Finney, Wallingford. And district councils are important to me because I served on the Ballard District Council. The Green Lake District Council meets at the Hearthstone where my grandmother's twin lived, and these places are important to me. I would also like to take a moment to recognize Thomas Whittemore, who was the Department of Neighborhood's liaison to our district for so many years. He retired recently, and we were honored to present him with a proclamation honoring his service. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Angie Gerald of the Ballard District Council. Angie, take it away.
Great, thank you. I'll try and make this pretty quick. I was going to give about a 2-minute update from Ballard District Council, and we have several questions for you, but I'll try and hold it to just 1 or 2 because I know we really have a lot to get through and had the late start. So my name is Angie Gerald, and I'm serving this year as Vice President of Ballard District Council. It's an organization that's been around for more than 30 years. We have 5 other board members, and our public meetings are the second Wednesday of each month, excluding August. Due to the pandemic, we've shifted for the first time to holding some online meetings, but we really hope to get back to in-person or at least a hybrid model as soon as it's safe. A district council is different from a community council. The idea of a district council is to have a larger umbrella organization where local community councils, business chambers, nonprofit groups, political groups, PTAs, all kinds of organizations can come together at the larger neighborhood level to share information and to build relationships. This use of the term district, it predates the current 7 city council districts, which came into being in 2013. In the late 1980s, the Seattle Department of Neighborhoods initiated the concept of 13 neighborhood districts, but in 2016, they pulled back from supporting this model. The Ballard District Council was always one of the most active, and it has continued as a nonprofit group. So participating organizations in Ballard District Council include numerous community councils, Sunset Hill, Whittier Heights, East Ballard, Shilshole Marina, and more. We have business advocacy groups like Ballard Alliance, Crown Hill Village, North Seattle Industrial Association, and numerous local nonprofits also participate, like Sustainable Ballard, Groundswell Northwest, Friends of the Burt Gilman, and Ballard Historical Society. Some of our recent meeting topics have included presentations on major building developments on Market Street, a panel on the reopening of Webster School as a K-8 public school. That's the former site of the Nordic Museum in Sunset Hill. We've had presentations by the Seattle Police Community Service Officer Program, which is the new unarmed civilian officer program. We also had a presentation by the Seattle Community Police Commission, which is the civilian oversight group initiated by the federal consent decree. We've had presentations on the Inner Bay Armory project, the Crown Hill Upzone, a variety of candidate forums, and lots more. So Ballard District Council has a website, a Facebook page, YouTube channel, and an email list. We're basically no budget and very volunteer driven, and we really welcome community members and organizations to participate. We could use help with outreach, and no matter your interests, it's a really great antidote to all of the clamor of social media. So to be able to gather with a variety of community members and to talk and to learn together at the neighborhood level. So we hope more Ballardites will join us this fall and beyond, and we'd love to continue reinvigorating the concept of neighborhood civics in Seattle, starting at the Ballard level. And with that, I guess I jump into my first question. And we wanted to focus first of all on police reform, which is such an important topic right now. So Councilmember Strauss, City Council has strongly conveyed that you will be significantly and immediately making changes to the Seattle police budget. What does this mean in practicality for the city in general and for Ballard in particular in the next 6 to 12 months and 2 to 3 years? What parameters are you using to judge your accountability for public safety outcomes in the near term?
Thank you, Angie. That's a really great question. And as we discussed, as I shared with you just a moment ago, we are in the middle of the beginning of this historic conversation. What we have seen is a large amount of people from throughout the city requesting change to be made and change to be made now. What is important is that we make sure to move at a pace that allows us to scale up service delivery in a way that does not jeopardize public safety, so that there's a continuance of operations. So that's why I said it's important to, if defund is a scary word to you, to also think of this as scale down, scale up. Because if we are providing another entity the responsibility of providing public safety before they are ready to, then we are jeopardizing the success of this transition. And so when I look at Ballard, I understand that public safety in Rainier Beach is different than in Ravenna. It's different in Ballard than it is in Beacon Hill or Lake City as it is in Leschi. And so what I see in Ballard is a very different need than it is in Beacon Hill, right? Like we have a lot more social service needs than we do intervening in the school to prison pipeline, as many other parts of our city needs to have those types of services. And so the metrics that we will be evaluating this by that is in development right now. And tomorrow you will be seeing another presentation regarding our plan and how we're moving forward. So I think that it's also really important that for people to know that we're not going to move so fast that it undercuts our ability to give you service provision, and we are going to move fast enough that we can make meaningful change.
Great. I'll just do one quick follow-on question and hand along to the next community council. Many of the police budget demands being presented are centered around the concept of community-based organizations. What does that tangibly mean for Ballard and other North Precinct neighborhoods? And how can people in the Ballard community engage in public safety at the local level during this time?
Excellent question. And so what I would ask of you is let me know what public safety means to you. What needs do you have in our community? Because community-based organizations may be the perfect match for many parts of our city. And what I see in Ballard especially, Green Lake as well, is the need for more crisis response teams. Because when you have somebody having a mental health experience that needs to have interventions, we need to make sure that the proper mental health professionals are able to meet that person, address their needs, and resolve the situation for everyone who's passing by on the sidewalk to experiencing that. We'll hear, there will be many more conversations later today. In my experience, oftentimes somebody will call the police to intervene in a situation, and there isn't an appropriate police response to that intervention, to that request. And so, you call, you show up, the caller says, there was somebody in here yelling. The question is then, well, what would you like me to do to resolve this? The person has left, they've walked down the street, and there's not a meaningful intervention. When we have the appropriate first responder that has the resources that they need to be responsive to the call that they've received, that's when we know that we'll have succeeded. We already have programs like this in the city of Seattle. Health One, DESC's crisis response teams. These are very similar to the Cahoots model that is based in Eugene. The Cahoots model responds to about 20% of 911 calls. The difference between the crisis response team and Cahoots here is that Cahoots is hardlined into 911 and does not require an officer's referral to receive services, whereas that is the case with crisis response team here in the city of Seattle. An officer has to go onto scene, make that referral, that occupies officer patrol time, and does not hardwire the crisis response team into 911.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate this opportunity.
Absolutely. And so I think the next district council is Fremont. We've got Eric Phil. Eric, how are you? Oh, still on mute.
There we go. Thanks for that. Thank you, Councilmember. It's great to be here, and thanks for hosting this town hall. The Fremont Neighborhood Council, I'll be pretty brief about this, meets on the fourth Monday of every month at 7 p.m. For the last few months during COVID, the board has been continuing to meet, and we haven't held public meetings, but starting next Monday, we plan to have broader based public meetings. So please visit fremontneighborhoodcouncil.org or our YouTube, or excuse me. The Neighborhood Council is committed to enhancing the quality of life for Fremont residents, and we're a forum to have conversations in Fremont, whether it's an opportunity for developers to present their projects and to hear back from the community about ways that those projects can be enhanced, or whether it's investments that we make in infrastructure, such as BFD schools playground, or art projects, art installation projects such as Ernst Park. So we invite you to come and find out more, and to also let us know how we can help improve the quality of your life in Fremont. A couple questions, Councilmember, from our board. First, it's a little bit of a long question, is what specific measures do you intend to put into place, and on what timeline, to assure that any reallocation of funding from the police budget is effectively applied to services that will address structural racism, assure better public safety, better provision of mental health services, social work support, drug rehabilitation, and housing for homeless?
So this is just, kind of teeing up past our last conversation, which is, what I saw presented to the city of Seattle, the city council, was 4 measures about moving 911 the call center out of SPD. It was about creating a pathway and a framework for this change. It was scaling down and scaling up and creating a housing for all. And what is really important is that we understand that when we're able to provide housing at a rate that allows people to come inside, that we are creating more stable environments for people having mental health, having chemical dependency, having the rest. And if there are stopgap measures that need to be put in place, whether it's renting hotel rooms, motels, those are things that we are exploring and very interested in creating, because housing really stabilizes a lot of the issues that we're talking about. As far as timeline, parameters, etc., again, I'll focus the conversation that we are just in the middle of the beginning of this important and historic conversation. And we need to, and I would say we are continuing to discuss this at City Council. We have pushed the conversation about SPD back 1 week already, because we understand that it is important to take meaningful time. And if you have input about what measures you think are needed to be a part of the program to be successful, I would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And one additional question. How will you work to increase cooperation within Seattle city government and with the school district, county, region, and state to build back from the problems revealed so starkly by the pandemic and the protests?
Yes. And so as part of my role on the city council, I am the representative to the Association of Washington Cities. And so this is a framework of small cities to large cities. And it is an honor to get to represent the city of Seattle there, because I spent a lot of time working in the Washington State Legislature ahead of this. And so it's an important way for us to continue the conversation with other cities in our region to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction. I'm also on the Regional Transportation Committee, which allows us to look, transit has taken a big hit this year, but looking at how we provide transit in a reliable fashion so that you can rely on your bus when we move out of this COVID experience. I continue to talk to folks on this Seattle School District Board. And it's all about relationships. It's being able to pick up the phone, have a conversation, and share what's actually going on, so you don't get muddled by what's being said in social media or what the headline on the newspaper says, even though the article says something a little different than the headline. It's about having these conversations, relationships, and picking up the phone. And that's what I've been doing, and I commit to continue doing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So our next district council is Green Lake. Paul Kostek, welcome, thank you, and take it away.
All right, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to be here tonight. I think everybody knows Green Lake, and we're surviving the beautiful weather and COVID. I'm watching people, I'm about a block off the lake, doing a good job of social distancing as they walk around the lake. It's a little confusing to people because they've changed all the rules of now we have everybody walking in the same distance and removing wheels, but people are doing well. I think some of the good news for Green Lake, one thing that I think a lot of people are going to like is the community center, which is kind of one of the older ones in the city, is actually getting a refurb right now and is in the process of being replaced in probably another 4 or 5 years. They've kind of done a great job of going, the Parks Department has done a great job of going out and talking to people about where the new center should be located, which is basically the answer has been where the old one is. So we're in the process now over the next couple of years of identifying the ideal location. But I think that'll be a great enhancement for the community. It's been a conversation I've had with lots of people saying they can't believe when they walk into the community center, when they see some of the others in the city, When you walk into the Green Lake one, that's probably the busiest in the city. Some of the things that are going on there. In terms of other things that are going on, Green Lake Village, that's where the PCC is located. They're actually going to be adding a third building to their facility. They're going to start that construction later this year, early next year. It's going to continue to add to the density and the use factors in Green Lake. In terms of other things that are going on, I think for anybody who's been to the lake lately, the transportation issue has probably been interesting, because if you come from the south or the east or the north, you see SDOT's out there redoing streets. PSE is in there redoing streets. They're putting in new ADA curbs areas. So it's been slowing down traffic, but obviously the expectation is great when all this is done. We're adding new lights, which I'm sure will be a thorough source of confusion to people. There'll be a new stoplight by the golf course and another one by Duke's on the north end, which I expect will help with traffic, but should be an interesting addition as that's being done. I also want to mention a sister organization, the Friends of Green Lake. They're the folks who spend all the time and energy monitoring the lake, looking at the water, making sure it's clean. They have several projects they're working on. One is going to be in memorial to a young man who drowned in the lake a few years ago, as a turtle viewing area that'll be on the west side of the lake. They're also looking at creating several floating islands that would be in the lake, and these would be in there to help keep the water clean, also provide a habitat for birds and for fish. And they're finally looking at another one that's kind of an interesting, and it kind of fits into the public safety area. They're looking at creating a project to put blocks marking where you are around the lake, because we've had several cases where people have fallen and hurt themselves, and calling up 911 and saying, I've fallen at Green Lake isn't always the best description for people. And sometimes there's something they can do or not. But this has a great potential to be a useful resource for people in terms of what's going on. In terms of the council, we meet every other month. We meet on the second Wednesday. And as the council member mentioned, we meet at the Hearthstone at 7 p.m. Our meetings are always open for people. I'm finishing my 2-year term as chair. And unless there's a mad rush for other candidates, I may be back for another second 2-year term as chair. I think the question I'd really like to ask, because it's one of the ones that comes up, and I mentioned that the transportation issue is still a huge challenge for people within the area, both with the buses, but also the questions occasionally with Metro is, don't worry, light rail will solve all problems. We're not really near light rail. Certain parts of Green Lake are, certain parts of it aren't. And so I guess the question to put forward would really be, how do you see transportation being handled? And I know there's lots of challenges, obviously, with the COVID taking place, but moving forward, as we expand light rail, what about bus service through communities such as Green Lake?
Paul, excellent question. Everyone's asking great questions here. So I used to live at 80th and Ashworth, and so I was right there in between the E line, the 16, and the 40 is
48.
48. Yeah, the 48, which is now the 45. I keep mixing that up. And so as soon as I came into office, I started talking to Metro, because it's important that as we have light rail opening, that when we realign the bus routes, that it still is providing, again, the same level, if not better level of service to the area, because the E line is a great direct route downtown. And we need to make sure that there's still a way to get around the lake to the Roosevelt station and to the Northgate station. We also need to make sure that there's just a direct way to get from Northgate down to the north end of the lake. Something that and one of the reasons why we engaged with the Wallingford District Council this time is because my understanding of Green Lake is that it is quite large. There's the north side, the south side, and then there's Finney Ridge, essentially. And so when I lived there at 80th and Ashworth, I would oftentimes catch the 5 up along the ridge and then walk down. And so as a transportation wonk, nerd, and analyst for many years, actually one of the first questions when I came into office was talking to Metro about their realignment. And it's something that I'm continuing to study and continuing to keep my eye on, because it's important that when we make these changes, we make them in a lasting and functional way. So again, let's keep the conversation going, Paul, because this is an important topic. And transit, once we get out of COVID, again, is the way that we're going to move the freight of people around our community.
Great, appreciate that. No, that'll be the only question. Let everybody else catch up here. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Moving to Finney Ridge, Finney District Council. I know that we were having some technical difficulties with Alice, and sounds like hit unmute one more time, and then you're good to go.
How
Take it
about
away,
that?
Alice.
Does
Here
it
we are.
work? Oh, we want to really thank you for taking the time. It's hard to get everybody together at the same moment on a certain day in the summer when we really, or normally in the lake. So I really appreciate this. Finney Ridge is on the way to everywhere. It's on the way to Ballard. It's on the way to Green Lake and all points east and all points west. So we see kind of a unique perspective. And we even go to Wallingford too. So, and Fremont. So we pass through all the neighborhoods and all my comrades on today's meeting. So we have all the same concerns about policing and public safety in Seattle. And we really encourage you to stay in touch with your constituents on that. I know you get a lot of emails from all over the city and everyone has their own philosophies. But we too are also very concerned, and we see a lot of property crime on both sides of the hill and on top of the hill, and we're concerned about public safety. I know there's higher areas with more assaults and things, but we support all our neighboring communities in this, and there is a way to do policing that works for all of us. So please keep us in the conversation. And we'd be happy to have you host a town hall dedicated to this topic. Really think about that if that's possible. I know we'll all be experts by the time that's over. One of the local issues that's on fire now is we have a healthy street closure at Green Lake and my colleagues over at Golden Gardens. And these two streets are major arterials and it's problematic. And SDOT had put out a survey that they generously extended at my request and maybe your help. And these are major arterial routes for people. And we really want SDOT to do a traffic analysis of alternative routes. So, and it's little things like the construction will start on 80th, which is one of our major east-west routes, and we can't go now down by Green Lake. And there's other solutions to make it healthy streets, like bicycle Sundays and things like that, that would keep traffic moving and keep that access and spread out. So we really want to talk to you about that. I can't tell you how many emails are going on about this, and people are really upset. So that's something I'd be happy to be part of and direct you to the people in Golden Gardens, because they are really ramping up their efforts to a dramatic level, and we can discuss this at a low level and come to a better solution. So that's a local issue. We have also a lot of community groups committed to social justice, and with the help of P&A, Finney Neighborhood Association, and a lot of subgroups. And so we as a community are committed to that and want to be part of that conversation. I want to add something to Paul's comment. The traffic light that he was talking about at the south end of Green Lake has been taken off the project. Although they poured the infrastructure in the ground, it's shown as a deleted element in the project because of healthy streets. So that's all part of that conversation we need to have and connect the different groups that are doing that. So we're working on social distancing and mask wearing. I've seen high compliance with that, and it's been great. We want to stay healthy.
Thanks, Alice. I was taking notes during your conversation right there, and so all I'll say is yes, we're going to continue having conversations about policing. We're going to make sure that we do this the right way, because the worst thing that we can do is set it up to fail and then say, look, we had this historic moment and we lost the opportunity. And so making sure to hear from you what is important for you and your community. It was clear to me that before this year, we needed to increase the amount of public safety that we were providing within our community. And that still remains the case, in my opinion, that we have more work to do. And in this moment, we have a historic opportunity to make important changes that really address what is the root in each of our communities. And each of our communities have it a little bit differently. Going back to...
There are these micro policing plans, and I don't know if everyone in this group has participated in those, that SPU has been running every summer. And I encourage all my colleagues, Angie knows, because Angie goes to North Precinct Advisory Council. There's a whole myriad of things that SPD does, and everyone thinks of them as on the street, but there's a lot of background things that I think go on in the department that people need to be able to appreciate, and we need to keep as part of some department.
100% agree. We need to make sure that we are looking really at what programs we're funding, not just off the top of the top cut. We need to really use a scalpel to define these cuts, because there are so many programs that SPD does provide that are important to retain. And that's why we need to be able to do this in a thoughtful way. And that's why I say, if defund is a scary word for you, then we can talk about scale down, scale up. I just
evaluate.
We're a couple minutes over your right here. I do just want to hit on healthy streets, because we are talking about a moment with COVID cases still rising. More people are using our streets to walk around and to ride bikes. And it's important that we create enough space for everyone to be able to pass each other without being too close. And so healthy streets are an important way we can do this by allowing local access to still have access to their streets. Around Green Lake Way and Golden Gardens, there are some changes that need to be made. I'm working with SDOT to make those changes. When Golden Gardens, which is just up the street from where I live right now, when they rolled that out, I said, oh my goodness, there are some serious considerations that you missed here. We got everyone on the phone. It was a Friday afternoon. Everyone took my call, and we made those important changes, because essentially what was happening was boats with trailers were going down, and then the road closure sign was too far down the road, and you get this boat with a trailer that was stuck on a side street. And so this is some of those, basic acts of governance that you might not see from me, because I'm not a show horse. I'm just a workhorse. When I see a problem, I just try and get on it and get it done. So I want to make sure that, and then you talked about social justice. I'm happy to continue the conversation with you, Alice. I do want to just make sure that we have time to hear from Glenn before the wrap up of this section. So thank you, Alice. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll talk more.
Talk more. Glenn, my apologies. Introductions. Weinford District Council, the amenable Glenn Singer.
Yeah, hi. My name is Glenn Singer. I'm Vice President for Weinford Community Council, and I'm very pleased to be here. Let me tell you just a little bit about what Weinford Community Council's all about and what we're trying to accomplish. We're still for affordable housing. Our focus is on family affordable housing, 2 and 3 bedroom housing. We're also aging in place, which no one has ever talked about during the last few years. And also under this affordability is homeless. We need to continue to focus on that. We've supported North Lake Village, the tiny house. We supported it. We funded it to some degree. And we're also asking the city to look at public land to handle the problem that we're talking about. We also, one of our focuses is land use coordination with the city to provide input, concerns, and suggestions on new projects in the area and design review. Transportation has been hit on, but what we want to talk about is transportation strategies that take into consideration bikers, walkers, and people still drive cars. And under this, and Councilmember and I have talked about an issue, which is parking. 45th Street is our main drag in Wallingford, and our commercial, our restaurants, our stores are having trouble surviving, and parking is a big issue. So we have to keep considering that. We're kind of unique here in Wallingford because we border Lake Union, and we have a special committee that works with the waterways, and waterways are public access to Lake Union. And we're constantly fighting because private groups, and we're working with Waterway 20 right now. The police department took that over, and Councilmember, there's going to be, I think, a piece of legislation coming across, which we would hope you would support. Also, one thing we're excited about, and one of the reasons why I think we're here, is we instituted a city council liaison strategy. And I'm very fortunate to be the guy that's chairman of this group. And what we do is we meet monthly in some form with Councilmember Strauss or Councilmember Pedersen, because we have two, we're in District 4 and 6. And we talk about concerns, we talk about issues, we talk about opportunities, we talk about areas where we don't agree and why we don't agree. And we continue to keep working that process. And we're excited about that. However, this is all good. We're making progress on our efforts, but we took pause, particularly under the latest situation we've been under. And we said we need to revisit our goals and strategies in light of the racial equality to contribute to ensure that the Black Wallingford residents feel secure, feel safe, feel welcome, and that want them to contribute to the Wallingford community. So we're going back, we're going to reinforce this, and we're going to make sure that Wallingford is a place that is acceptable for everyone. Our big question, Dan, and it's council member, our big question is kind of that what I've heard from all the councils is involvement, input. That's our message from Wallingford. We need input before decisions are made on safe streets, on police. We understand and we go along with that, but how is that going to affect the residents? What cuts, and are we going to benefit from them, or are we going to, where are we? So we need more input on that. And the other one is design review on new communities and new development. So I'd like to know how you feel about that.
Excellent. And then Glenn, wonderful synopsis. I'm going to just begin again, cognizant of time. I've been writing down what you were saying, so I'm just going to kind of run through your run down your list. Alice, you are still unmuted. We can hear you agreeing, which is great. So if you could go back on, thank you. So Glenn, you started off talking about 2 and 3 bedrooms, housing for families. Something that I see in Ballard and that you're seeing in your community, that over in Wallingford as well, is that we get large, skinny, tall buildings that have a lot of stairs. And we know that families have difficulty raising their kids in a building that has many stairs. My mom worked for hospice for many years. And so it's aging in place, and all ages and abilities are 2 frameworks that I put my my work through. That's why I started talking about cafe streets, because we need to create more all ages and abilities spaces rather than just sidewalk cafes, which are limited to just the sidewalks. Talking about homelessness and using public land, completely agree with you. Want to continue that conversation. Land use coordination, design review. I think that there could be some changes made with design review. And if early outreach isn't working well, especially if early outreach isn't working well during COVID, please let me know. It's really a pleasure to get to meet with you on almost a monthly basis. I want to I'll need to circle back with my team to make sure that we're always on the schedule. And then transportation strategy, bikers, walkers, driving and parking. You hit it. I mean, don't tell Councilmember Peterson, but some of my favorite restaurants are over there in Wallingford. And oftentimes, at least now in the COVID era, I'm having to drive. And so I understand those parking woes because it impacts a business's ability to have customers. And when we see multimodal programs that allow people to walk, ride, and bike and walk, roll, and bike, those are the ways. When we see those modes of transportation out in front of commercial spaces, the wallet is closer to the cash register than if it was in the car driving by. Also, looking at the fact that transit is the freight of people, and being able to move people around effectively and reliably is something that is going to be important in the post-COVID world. And just, I love being able to work with you on this. Waterway 20, I am a humongous advocate for access to the water, local access to the water, and using our street ends to do so. I've got some changes that I'd like to make that have honestly been a little bit delayed because of the changing environment of COVID. And your conversation about involvement upon the police, the changes of public safety, upon design review, land use, this is involvement that I'm grateful to have from you. And it's, again, going back to relationships, it's important for me to have a relationship with you so that we make sure that when we're right sizing public safety, that we're able to create and keep the level of service and the service model that delivers you the outcomes that you need. So thanks, Glenn. And those, we started a couple minutes late. It looks like we are actually just on time, considering that we were 15 minutes late to start off this evening. So again, want to thank our district councils. Next up is our community conversation about race. DeMarcus Wigfall is an organizer for Justice for Black Lives. He lives in Green Lake and works in Ballard. I was fortunate to meet DeMarcus at the Juneteenth rally organized by Justice for Black Lives. And the people leading conversations in our community are the same people leading the conversation we were having today. So with that, I'll turn it over to DeMarcus. Would you like to introduce our panel?
Hello, everyone. My name is DeMarcus Wigfall. I am a resident in Seattle, District 6, for at least about the past 5 years, originally from San Diego. And I will just hand it off to the people that I chose and talk about the panel. They are all in the neighborhood. Some of them I know personally, a few I don't, but we all kind of share the same ties. And I feel like the panel is a nice representation of the people that live in District 6 also. So with that, I'll just have everybody introduce themselves that are on the panel and where they're from and why are they here.
And sorry, DeMarcus, just one piece of housekeeping item, because we're changing from just having the speaker view to the panel view. If you're not part of the panel, we'll be just highlighting the panel. So that change is occurring. Apologies, DeMarcus. Take it away again. Sorry.
No problem. So do we need a couple of minutes to do that or seconds?
Should be happening.
We'll go ahead and remove the previous panelists, and it will just be the panelists moving forward. Please do join us on the YouTube link, and I will make sure that is sent to you again. Thanks, folks.
Well, I don't know about everybody else, but it's pretty hot. So I have the door closed. I was really trying to let me be quiet. Don't giggle. Don't make any faces. So I'm just killing time until we get everything situated here. But I hope everybody's staying cool. and well ventilated. And so if we can, we'll start with Brian. And if you're ready, just introduce yourself. And then we'll do Rochelle, we'll do Chris, and Julie, Phoenix, and Sergio.
All right, yeah, no doubt. So thank you guys for inviting me. My name's Brian. I've lived in Ballard for 2.5 years, lived in Seattle for 2.5 years, moved here from Harlem, New York City. I don't really value myself on kind of what I do for a living, but if the context is helpful, I work in event and experiential marketing.
Rochelle?
My name is Rochelle Dickerson. I have lived in Seattle for about 27 years. I've been in the District 6, since 2003, I want to say is how long I've been here. And I moved here from the Midwest. I grew up in Northwest Indiana. I work at the UW, and I wanted to thank Marcus for inviting me. We don't know each other, and despite my protestations, he was taking a chance. I appreciate being here.
Chris?
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Spring. I've lived in North Seattle for most of my life. My grandmother grew up in Ballard, and I've been fortunate to live here with my family for the last 13 years. I'm really grateful to be a part of this conversation, and I hope to be an ally to those in my community who have experienced injustice through racism. I hope that through meetings like this, we can find actionable, substantive changes so that people in my community who have been made to feel like their lives don't matter can experience law enforcement the same way I have, which has been mostly positive. All that being said, I'm not sure I quite understand yet how defunding can accomplish this, but my ears are open. That's about it for me.
My name is Julie, and I have lived in Ballard for 13 years. I moved here from Boston for a doctoral program, and I identify as a change maker, and I'm very interested in listening and learning and finding ways that I can have an impact.
Can everybody hear me okay if I speak at this volume?
Can hear you now.
Great. I'd like to start off by introducing myself in my traditional way by saying Klekach Henak Phoenix Yechat Duasak Klinget Hanyak Husani Haras Yai Hirak Takwanedi Nachat Sati Yesh Ayahat Tils Gantuluk Yuhat Sati Gurshish Duamish. So in English, my name is Phoenix. I am of the Tlingit Nation of the Pacific Northwest. And Yakusani means we are the noble people. I'm also of the Haida Nation. My family is of the Takwanedi clan, of the Whale House, of the Raven, Moiety, Dog, Salmon, and Woodworm clan. And I said gratitude to the Duwamish, where we are today, and how I'd like us to continue, how I'd like us to start from here on forward. And what I like to advocate for is a land acknowledgement before we gather as a community to understand whose land that we're on, and not just to send a passing nod, but by acknowledging and then committing to a relationship change. So the land that we're on today are the ancient lands of the Duwamish tribe, and the treaty lands that are home to the Coast Salish First People, the Suquamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, Puyallup, and many others who were here preceding colonization, genocide, slavery, and the occupation that we now know as the United States. So for me, I'm an Air Force veteran. I served 4 years active duty and later as a federal contractor for the Oregon Army National Guard in suicide prevention, as well as Air Combat Command. I am Seattle born, indigenous to the Pacific Northwest. I'm also a parent living here in Ballard with child in Seattle Public Schools. And so for me, for today, what I'm bringing to the table is my equity work. So I primarily operate as a consultant for social change leadership and making institutionalized and social changes. So thank you, DeMarcus, for having me here.
Thank you. Sergio.
Hello, how's everybody doing? I want to thank DeMarcus for having me on the panel. My name is Sergio Garcia. I live in the Finney Ridge, Greenwood neighborhoods, and I also work for SPD. I'm a police officer and I am assigned to the Ballard and Fremont neighborhoods. I've been in Seattle for 3 years. I am a transplant from Miami, Florida, where I was born and raised. And as a good friend of DeMarcus, I'm just here to kind of have that conversation, which I think is a very uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had for us to kind of get to where we want to get and make the achievements we want as a community. So I'm just happy I could be here. I am here as a resident and as a neighbor, and I'm here to answer any questions or hear any suggestions just to kind of make that idea of what we want. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we all know Councilmember Dan Strauss, thanks for kind of asking for this to be had. I wish we could have actually had an auditorium full of people so we could really get into like all the deep discussions, because there's so much on the plate to even talk about. But you know, while the other council members from like Finney, Wallingford were talking, I was really trying to focus on all the things that, you know, are being brought about, but I couldn't because this issue pressing on us right now was more pertinent than streets. It was more pertinent than the parks. It was more pertinent than just about every other thing that was talked about, because lives are being directly affected as well as homeless lives, but like people of color are definitely in a tragedy right now, as from all the protests that are going on. So we're going to open a discussion, and hopefully I want everybody to be as comfortable and as candid as possible, because that's the only way we'll actually have real change and actually get to the heart of the matter, is by having those truthful conversations about how we are feeling in those moments and how we build relationships with people that don't look like us and people in other communities that, you know, might not be on the same class level, pay grade, or look like us. So if we're all in agreement with that, I just want to check in with our first kind of question to everyone on there. How has the protests related with COVID affected you in your personal relationships? And I'll start with Julie with that.
Had to unmute myself. That's an interesting question. I think that, you know, on a very practical level, if kind of the uprising that happened on such a large scale hadn't happened during COVID, I would have participated in different ways. And so it took a lot of ingenuity for me to figure out how I could be a participant, because I cared about it long before the in custody killing of George Floyd and these most recent protests, and have worked on these issues previously. But I am definitely very not interested in spreading the coronavirus or getting it. And so for me, I didn't go to the protest. I helped you with the Juneteenth celebration and tried to make it more visible and do what I could. And so what I think is interesting about this moment isn't just the coalescing around this issue, the sustained interest in it, but I think it's really causing people to find all different kinds of ways to take action. And I think that's one of the reasons why it is continuing to go. And so for me, you know, COVID is very unfortunate, but I think it's really lent some good things to this particular political moment.
Yes. Rochelle, do you want to answer that also?
Well, first of all, I want to make it very clear that this isn't about people of color. And I didn't realize when we were introducing ourselves that I should be more clear about who I am. As far as, you know, I'm a Black woman, I'm a light-skinned sometimes ambiguous Black woman. But growing up in West Indiana, I grew up in one of the probably most actively racist areas, raised by a white family who actually didn't tell me I was Black. They told me I was Native American because that was better. I found out I was Black when I was 18 and have been processing my whole life the internalized racism because I never heard Black people refer to anything but the N-word when I was growing up. Coming to Seattle, I hear a lot about, heard a lot about how diverse it was here and how progressive it was here. But I'll have to be honest with you, I found Seattle to be probably the most insidiously racist and catering to white supremacy city in the country. And I say insidious for a reason, because the word in the street is that it's liberal and progressive. But everything that happens here serves white privilege, everything. And the Black community here has been gentrified out of the city, and has had to kind of coalesce itself around these protests and try to figure out who we are because of the fact that we really haven't had a voice ever. As far as these protests go, I've been watching my whole life, watching Black people continue to be dehumanized, subjugated, murdered, not just by police, but, a lot by police, with no justice. And every single time this happens, I hear about all the reasons why it should have happened and what the person did to deserve it. And so I'll be honest with you that what happened with George Floyd was a catalyst, but it's only seemed to have been an issue and suddenly a frenzy for white people. And everybody's suddenly all aware. The reality is this is happening during COVID, but the communities that are most disproportionately affected by COVID are the ones that are on the street and having to rise up at this time, because quite honestly, we've had it. And, and I should make sure that I include, because it doesn't get included enough, is that it's also the Native American communities, the indigenous communities. We are talking about 400 plus years of, genocide, colonization, atrocities against both indigenous and Black people, land stolen. We are sitting, Phoenix was kind about it. You are sitting on stolen land. And talking about what should happen here when you're sitting on stolen land. And the people who you stole it from, and I say you because I mean white people and white supremacy, are still here. They're still here watching. And particularly the Duwamish tribe, they haven't even been able to get federal recognition. They got it during the Clinton administration, and then Bush took it away. And so they're just trying to get some validation. Never mind the fact that they're watching their land continually be corrupted by whiteness. And so talking about, whether or not you can go out to the protests for COVID and what you can do and trying to find what you could do, it's really hard for me to hear that, because I get it. This is a pandemic and this is awful, but it's still a huge privilege to be in that position. And there's a reality that a lot of the white people I deal with in this city aren't looking to hear from the Black and indigenous communities about what they want to do, or they want to hear from us, but then they want to tell us how we should do it differently, how we should talk about it differently. And, personally, I'm at a point where I'm done having these conversations. I am done debating and discussing the humanity of other people. I am done listening to the people who created this system and are the people that benefit from and are maintaining this system because it serves you. telling me that they get to have a voice, that the only way we can do this is if they get to have a voice and if they get to say how it's done. I'm just done, because the reality is that we cannot dismantle this system by having the people who created it and benefit from it dictate how it happens. And you know, it's frustrating for me to hear a lot of the reports from the neighborhood councils, because I get it. You know, it's hard when you have to go around Green Lake. You know, it's hard. But the reality is that we are talking about, again, 400 plus years of people not being seen as human, people not being treated with justice. There is no justice for us. And, you know, we talk about what happens to Black people, but the reality is that Indigenous people per, capita are more likely to be killed by police. They are more likely to be brutalized. They are more likely to be incarcerated. And so our two communities, people of color, I get it, but it's Black and Indigenous people. And I just need to make sure that that is really clear.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. Yes, so Sergio, I want to toss this to you about the same thing too, because I know you're on the front lines also. Just seeing all this stuff going and also being new here to the city and, experiencing things the way that you do and our conversation and talking. I'm a prior military, so some of the things that I've seen is militarization of the police force, and I'm not comfortable with that as a citizen, as someone that once served. So the same question posted to you, how do you feel in relation to COVID and also the protests? How are they affecting your life, your personal life, your friendships, and your coworkers? How are you dealing with those things?
Yeah, so I mean, as you can imagine, I'm a person of color, first generation American. So it's affecting me, but I'm also a police officer, right? So it's affecting me on both sides. At the end of the day, when I take the uniform off, I'm still a person of color. I can't take my brown uniform off and just be white in a mostly white dominant district or even city, right? So at the end of the day, I'm still a brown person no matter what. And I've also experienced a lot of what some of the panelists are speaking of in Seattle. I come from a place in the country that is extremely diverse. So I've never really had to deal with all these things. So I'm caught in a weird place where, so first of all, on COVID, I just think it's unfortunate these two things happen at the same time. But I think that it's a conversation that we need to have. I think that COVID, hopefully we get a change of administration here and we start doing the right things, and COVID will be something of the past, hopefully sooner than later. But I think that race is something we're not going to get rid of in a couple of months. And there isn't a vaccine for, a potential racist system or a perception of what it is that we're feeling. So there isn't a vaccine for that. So it's a conversation and it's something that we need to have now. So that's my take on, coronavirus and the protests going on right now. As far as, what do I think? I'm trying to remain very neutral in the approach where I kind of want to provide a very neutral information, right? Because a lot of us have questions and, we have these ideas, and I say we as a community members, right, have these ideas on why does the police do this or why do they have this equipment? And I don't necessarily have the answers. I think that the answers are are achieved having a collective conversation, right? And I also feel uncomfortable because I feel like I'm not from Seattle, and all these things kind of happened just within under 3 years, right? So I've never really felt like I'm not considered a Seattleite. So I'm kind of in a weird place because I'm a person who is of color. So I feel kind of out of place in some places in the city. And also I'm a police officer, and right now is something that it's not too popular in the city. So when I'm at work, I feel like, the looks are on me. And when I'm outside of work, I feel like the looks are on me as well. Again, I'm just here to try to provide as much information as a resident to my neighbors. I think that, fortunate for me, I've been privileged enough to grow up. Like I said earlier, I've been able to grow up somewhere that is extremely diverse. So although we've been fighting the same things, we are the majority where I come from. Black and brown people are the majority, right? So I'm sympathetic towards people of color here because the fight is bigger here. But at the same time, I think that we need to have the conversation, right? And we have all these ideas and we're putting all these things on paper. And I'm open to anything. I am legitimately open to anything. I just think that we need to educate everybody and each other to kind of draft out what it is that we want out of policing in the city, right? I think that we talk a lot about, if you ask me, this is more of a personal opinion, right? What's wrong with policing, and I'm not necessarily speaking of policing, law enforcement itself, is the judicial system, right? And I could go on and on about so many flaws that are in the judicial system, right? When people go to prison and they serve their terms, we're not preparing these people for when they come out of jail. We're basically setting up people for complete failure. You know, there's certain laws that do target people of color. There's a lot of things wrong in the judicial system. I don't necessarily think that that is me. At the end of the day, I'm a person. I'm able to, you know, be a human being. So, you know, the conversation is a lot bigger than just talking about SPD. So I get the frustrations. I'm just as frustrated when I see these videos come out, right? There's no justification, but I think the conversation is a lot bigger than just SPD. But I think that here locally, whether we like it or we don't, I've worked at 2 different cities, 3,000 miles apart, and I've done a bit of traveling through my career, and I could tell you that Seattle Police Department by no means is it perfect. My experience as a person of color working there that has to deal with certain things as well is that this is probably the most progressive agency in the country, the most transparent and the most accountable in the country. You know, and I think that moving forward, it gives us a blank piece of paper per se to kind of draft out what it is that we want it to look tomorrow, right? If we were a police department in Mississippi, the conversation would be a lot more difficult. I don't think that we're going to have that much of issues achieving what it is that we want as a community. So again, I'm here to kind of throw ideas around and actually have a conversation and not just try to, you know, feed you what I think, right? Because those are my experiences and I'm caught in a weird place. So I'm more than happy to answer questions and share information. So.
You know, I'm really sorry. I'm going to hijack this for a second because that is not true. The Seattle Police Department has been under consent decree for killing people and not being transparent since 2011. And in 2019, the judge said, you're not there. In fact, you are going backwards. So they aren't the most progressive in the country. Maybe the people you work with are. And you are not neutral. You are a police officer. And this isn't about you personally. Of course, you're all human. We're all humans. We all have families. We all have backgrounds. But the reality is that unless you are prepared to admit that this police force, that the policing in this country is inherently racist. I mean, it is based in slave catching and stealing land from Native Americans. Unless you're willing to admit that and start naming names, you're not neutral. And the reality is that, you know, I'm sorry that it's affecting you personally, but the reality is that the police are the problem. The policing in this country are the problem. And we're not going to be, you know, defunding is great, and that's a great start. But the reality is that we are going to have to abolish and reform the system because you cannot reform a system that is rotten at its core. Everybody keeps talking about how police have been infiltrated by white supremacists. That it is white supremacy. That's what it's based in. And so, you know, you're a person of color, I get it. But, you know, if you lived in a place that you never experienced racism, that's really interesting to me because I've lived in diverse places too, but I've never not experienced it. I've never, ever, ever been in a position where I haven't noticed it around me. And that's why I say this isn't about people of color. This is about the people who are the most impacted right now. And these protests are happening because a Black man was murdered again. And so this, and I'm including Indigenous people because people are not talking about them. They're constantly erased in this conversation, and they are having the same pain. And
I'm sorry to interrupt you, jump in for a minute, Rochelle. Brian, I want to toss this one to you because you're coming from New York with a whole different experience with police and also the systems, because we do know, and I think if everybody can agree with just a nod, that the system itself, like the founding and its principles on there, are inherently racist. And I think that's what people are awakening to now, to understand those things where they didn't. They just thought that the police were there to protect, serve the community or capital or buildings, but not necessarily the community, because that's not what it was based in. Maybe ideally some other country before this was founded, but like not now. And the proof is in the pudding, seeing the videotapes, seeing the people dying, seeing George Floyd, seeing Breonna Taylor, people that work in those fields, they're taking the power to their head and implying it or pressuring people to do their will and their bidding. And in New York, I know that there's, so many stories. Well, the TV show that came out, they talked about the Central Park Five. I feel like you would be better to kind of like enlighten us on that.
All right. Well, let me take it back a little step. So first off, like what Phoenix said, I thought was really important. It really made me think about a KRS-One line: "There can never be justice on stolen land." That hit me hard. And then also thinking about what Rochelle just said, I mean, I think we really need to like sit back and absorb. I know it was a lot, but we got to absorb the thing, at least that hit me the most. She said she grew up, and please, let me know if I'm misrepresenting it, but you said you grew up where the only way you even heard about Black people referred to was the N-word, and then moved to Seattle, and it was the most insidiously racist place you've ever lived. Just sit with that for a second. Now, I'll also say to Sergio, I agree with you. I think police are not the problem. If we had to say there was a single problem, I would say whiteness is the problem. Now, I want to be very clear. I didn't say white people. Whiteness, the system, is a very serious problem. And we've got to figure out how to judo flip this so that Blackness is not constantly under the microscope. How do we manage to dismantle and deconstruct white supremacy and whiteness as the central issue and the central problem? In my opinion, also, I want to be clear, I'm just speaking for myself. Honestly, I'm not even qualified to be on this panel. Aside from just, the fact that DeMarcus invited me, I really have no real qualifications. So just speaking for myself and saying my own opinions. Now let me skip from there. So you were talking about like the perspective of coming here from New York and most specifically Harlem. So I experienced quite a bit within just my transition here. I can say, gosh, it's so hard to deconstruct, but what I have found of Seattleites, and I'm sorry to like lump everybody in, but I found that Seattleites present themselves as politically liberal. I've also found Seattleites to be emotionally conservative. And I find that it's very difficult to get Seattleites to look beyond white progressiveness. It's very difficult to get Seattleites to analyze not just white supremacy, but their own participation in white supremacy. I find that Seattleites are very willing to claim the word ally. And I understand that the intention is positive, but we've also heard that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. My question for white Seattleites is, why is the terminology, the nomenclature ally, so important?
So, Councilmember Dan Strauss, I'm going to toss that over to you. As far as we're talking about progressives, liberals, and like how to deconstruct the idea of whiteness in Seattle and in District 6, because we know that this District 6 was as technically known as the immigrant part for Norwegian. You have a big Norwegian festival. It has a really big museum there. So how do we take the concept of whiteness and eradicate it, or even identifying it? And has COVID and this like being isolated made you dig deeper into that?
Just taking notes. And DeMarcus, I think that we let you know this panel started late, or this whole conversation started late. We're also going to extend the time, so we're going to run until 7 p.m. because this is an important conversation to have. I also want to take one step back, and both Brian, Sergio, Rochelle, you all mentioned something to the, I guess maybe more Brian and Sergio, that there was a question about being from Seattle, or I didn't feel like I was from Seattle. I'm from Seattle. Or you're not qualified to be on this panel. You are qualified to be on this panel. You are an important member of our community. You are here. You are, for no other reason, you are qualified to be on this panel because you have you're a community member. You are District 6. And we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of, when we talk about deconstructing whiteness, it's very important for white people to have conversations with white people. It is important to challenge the mistakes we make that are rooted in good intentions, because again, it's, I can say something with an intention and how it is received is completely different. We even had we had that as part of the prep call when I was just talking about timing. What I intended to say was not the message received. And so when we talk, I don't know why ally is such an important marker to have necessarily. The way that I view allyship is it is a path. It's not a destination. It is a consistent and constant work of education and understanding and empathy to understand that people have a different lived experience than me. Chris mentioned earlier that he would like to see everyone in the community be able to have the experience that he has had with police. And I have had mostly a good experience with police throughout my life. And that is a privilege that I have, that a lot of our community members and neighbors have. And I think that that's why when they hear defunding, it's a scary word. And that's why it's also important to also frame it as scaling up, scaling down. And how do we deconstruct it? I think this is a conversation that us white folk have to have with each other.
So I just want,
yeah,
respectfully, just want to say something real quick. Is honestly don't get a lot of chance to converse in this format. Again, my own opinion, but I personally think what white folks need to do is educate themselves. I think there's, and I don't mean this to diminish that what you just said, that white folks do need to have more conversations with themselves. I get that. But I want to make sure that the piece that is represented is that, and I don't mean to, it's a problematic phrasing, but so hopefully you can understand what I mean. But like a situation where the blind are leading the blind in conversations, educate yourself, because, and I'm not associating this to any particular person. I'm just saying, a racialized understanding, knowledge, literacy. These are things that are programmed from, when I was born. I mean, I've been running this race from memory. I would say educate yourself, because it's all right there in the history. Honestly, it's not that hard. We've left a breadcrumb trail through music, art, history, scholarship, academics. It's all there. Learn the history and try to deprogram from the history, his story that we've been told. And so I know there's a lot of valuable voices, so I'll throw it back to y'all, but I just want to make sure, this is one of my personal pet peeves is, all of the white people getting together to talk. To me, it's always frustrating because it can be an echo chamber of bad ideas, honestly. If we're not basing it in education, study, rigor, history, learn it. It's there. And it's at the library.
Right. So some things I want to just tag on to Brian before I get around to a couple more people. Phoenix, I do want to hear from you. Is breaking down whiteness. When you clump people together, in my opinion, these are my opinions on my own, is that why can't people start collecting back their heritage? If you're Jewish, you're Jewish. Why do you have to preface it with white? If you're German or your family is from that heritage and stuff like that, why do you have to preface it with white? So I think in that little tidbit, to break it down to say that I am what my heritage is, where people of color, enslaved people have come here, that has been stripped from them. So how can you find yourself an identity of Blackness when you don't know that? And then you clump two groups of people and pit them against each other, whiteness and Blackness, when that's not the true story. So I think, in my own opinion, in breaking down whiteness, you have to really break down the cultural, inheritance of those things. If you are Jewish, if you are German, if you're Italian, if you're and really dive into that to start breaking up that big group that is we're having a race war on top of that. That's just my opinion. I've thought about this and I've tried to break it down. And it was part of my own opinion to say, white people, y'all need to fix it. White people, y'all need to talk to each other, talk to your racist family, talk to your racist friends, because we know that those are conversations that happens in parties, happens at work, happens in the gym, it happens in places where it shouldn't be happening. So in order to dismantle it, you really have to call people out where it is.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead.
You just ignited something in me. As you're talking and as Rochelle was talking and pretty much everyone on the panel, something that keeps coming to mind to me is inclusive language. And it especially came up when Rochelle, excavated the fact that we don't say Black, Brown, and Native communities, and we leave off the Native communities, which are very affected by police violence and all other manner of oppression. But I think when I'm hearing white people, what's coming to mind for me is inclusive language, with respect to the fact that I come to all of these issues as a physically disabled person. You wouldn't know if I didn't, because you're only seeing me from the neck up. And so even when we say white people, there are all kinds of white people in that category. And it's not exactly what you're saying, DeMarcus, but it is what I am thinking about as you made me springboard to that, is that I am white, but I think that before I'm white, I identify as disabled. And part of being part of that minority, which Black people belong to, Native people belong to, all people can belong to that minority community. My status is very protected based on my minority status. I was talking to DeMarcus a few weeks ago and I was not only are police do actually target disabled people. Freddie Gray is an example of that. He had some cognitive impairments, but that probably lent to some of his problems with the police in Baltimore. But anyways, in general, because I am white and I am disabled, I am very, very protected within my minority status. People will run across the street to open the door for me. They don't generally want to hurt me. And it is that recognition in that identity and how I am protected, and therefore, and then seeing other people whose minority status makes them more vulnerable to violence is what informs my anti-racist
Can you guys hear me?
feeling. Yeah.
Great. For time sensitivity and for the awareness of being a white person in this space, taking up.
Phoenix, are you still there? You're breaking up a little bit.
Seeing as problematic around. I think that specifically the retort back to Black, Brown, and Native people talking about marginalized identity, with then recentering and refocusing the conversation on.
Phoenix, we can't hear you, so can we take a minute to kind of reset what you're going to say? Is everybody else still okay with speaking and stuff like that?
Anyways, I was just saying, I'm thinking of inclusive language, and I was trying to position where I come from on these issues. It was a personal statement, maybe less so than a fully just political, theoretical statement. It was just coming to mind as people were talking.
That's a luxury that we don't have. We wake up brown, we wake up Black, we wake up Native. And so I think that was speaking to some of Rochelle's points here in talking about how people specifically who are white can opt out of showing up. And I specifically think that D6 has really cloistered themselves away as a white saturated district to be able to opt out and then quietly let things happen and then continue to benefit from them. So specifically going back to what I was hearing during community council around defunding, and people are worried and their property and whatnot. And I also hear that there's positive experiences specifically with white males and the police, and that other white families might have had a personally positive experience, and so they're afraid to let go of the police. I don't think that's a fear, that's a loss of padding and privilege. That this defunding is a dispersal and reallocation of unearned wealth and power. And I think that there needs to really be a distinct difference between that, and recognize that the operation of whiteness itself and white supremacy is the game of continuing to get more money, more privilege, more satisfaction, more property, more ownership, and more influence. And to really examine and deconstruct whiteness, as Brian was speaking to as well, is really saying that at some point you have to stop gaining. And it doesn't mean that you're losing, but there's an excess, that there's people walking around with excess of privilege. And that's a direct deficit to people from birth.
So Chris, can I toss that to you as one of the residents and also identified as white male here with the family living in Ballard?
Absolutely. Is there a specific part to that I should, just to be aware of time?
The question about gaining, and the question about gaining and getting more, and also your concern as far as your relationship with police, but also how you see the big the gap between those things.
Sure. I mean, I don't think there's a direct correlation between skin color and greed. Right? I don't personally see that, and I don't think it could be scientifically validated. However, that's not to say that there aren't people in our community who have been seriously disadvantaged, and we do need to find ways to help these people and to try to fix these problems. Personally, it's always been a really difficult topic to discuss, and I found that with with any real friends that I grew up with, right, that might not be white, we don't talk about it at all. It just doesn't come up. But then, we've all seen these videos on the internet. I've had friends that tell me, like, I won't drive up to that. I won't drive through Briar because every time I do, I get pulled over by the cops, or all of the different things that we can't deny happen, right? So, yeah, I would like to disconnect that idea of greed from whiteness. I don't think that it's a color issue, but I would like to get away from the idea of whiteness altogether, right? Like Brian said, like that shouldn't have to be a thing, because then it creates a polarity, right? And it creates this linear racial construct that we really don't need to have. But the problem is, if you get rid of this whole linear equation, then you're leaving people out who really need help right now. So I hope that we can dismantle this whiteness idea. But at the same time, anybody who needs to identify as something in order to be embraced in their community, I want to support that and be an ally to it. And I mean that sincerely.
So I know this is a mixed panel, but I want to know if just by a raise of hands for the people that this might affect, have you lost any friends over the last 3 months, or people that you cared about, or lost relationships due to having this conversation about race? Because where I work, I have to sometimes force people to even mention race or racism. And that to me is a problem. I'm like, I can't take off my skin. Every time I walk out of my door is a protest because of the way that I look. Sometimes the idea of being Black is that you have to adjust your look, you have to adjust the way that you talk, you have to adjust the way that you handle conversations with people. Sometimes you have to use kid gloves, you have to code switch just to function in this country. So at the stake of losing your humanity and who you are as a person, why are we so tied to the relationships that are harmful, hurtful, and not prospering us in anything due to racism? So just if you want to nod or sort of, have you lost any friends or lost connections with people close to you?
I like to actually not just nod.
Well,
Phoenix is dropping bombs too. That's what's so frustrating about this, is I want to hear the bombs get dropped and I can't hear it.
Phoenix, we need to get you an upgrade on that internet. So what would you like to say?
I was saying that I didn't necessarily lose anybody, that those who are not going to recognize my humanity do not get the privilege of having a relationship with me.
Right. But this is the thing. We were in 2016, you remember, the world was shocked when we were like, oh shit, white people don't really care about anybody of color, because why would y'all vote somebody in that is blatantly against melanin, blatantly? And this is where you have to question all your relationships, your friendships, your coworkers. Be like, who's out? You're like, really? I thought we were cool, or that one time you realize that, oh, I might be Black in a situation. Like Rochelle, I'm kind of referring to you. So you told me your story about Nick, you didn't even know you were raised by white family members, and they did not tell you that. And something it literally, I was like, really? People do that? And that to me was just there are people walking around that do that, and it's not a protection thing.
The people around me in my town thought of me as Black. I mean, I didn't know why they were treating me that way, but it certainly was, an issue. And, I do want to, this whole talk about getting rid of whiteness, and we don't want to talk about whiteness. White people want to be unique always. And the reality is that you're going to have to deal with the fact that you're white in a system that was created to serve you. And we need to address it. I mean, race is not the same as ethnicity. Jewish, German, all those others, that's ethnicity. That is not race. And we have to look at these things in order to dismantle it. And it's uncomfortable. It is painful. And you know what? After 400 plus years, it should be. It should be really painful. It should be really uncomfortable, because the reality is that there's a certain population in this country that has been served most and put on a pedestal in our system. Everything we know, everything we believe, all the words we use, you know, what we think is beautiful, valuable, respectful, everything has been created by whiteness. And
So,
it's not a personal thing. It's just the reality. And
so I'm sorry. I'm going to throw this in here for you. I mean, didn't mean to interrupt. Actually, I did mean to interrupt. I'm sorry, because we were running out of time. Let me stop lying. So, Dan, Councilmember Strauss and Sergio, I just want to ask something about qualified immunity, because that deals with police being held accountable, because this conversation is based around police brutality and violence. And also the budget, you know, cutting 50%, like that's great, but where are those going back? And I'm like, in plain terms, if you can explain that. And just a little caveat here, while you're thinking about that, I was told that, you know, when it comes to politicians and when it comes to people in positions of power, to be careful, because like some people will use melanin folks, would use people to go out and kind of like dog and pony trick to like sell the message that they want, the narrative that they want for the community. And how do you feel, Sergio and Councilmember Strauss, about that, using citizens to drive a political message, and also about qualified immunity, and should cops be held responsible, and can we get rid of that, and how do you feel about it? And Councilman Strauss, you can answer first.
You want me to go first? That sounds great. So I would say that as far as using people to drive a political motive, that is part of why I took myself out of this conversation, because I did not want to have an agenda other than to have District 6 residents speaking in plain terms with each other and for the community, because it's really hard to hear that these are, and it's not the first time I've heard these experiences in our community, in a place that I love, that I've grown up, that I intend to stay in for the rest of my life. And it's really, I wrote down, it's challenging to hear this is the case for the place I love and call home. And it's, you know, Brian, to your point, it is our job to do education for ourselves so that it's not blind leading the blind. And I also want to, I've been taking notes. So I sit here and I'm taking notes. And it's also, I want to highlight that there are good people in broken systems.
Yep. And I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
I think we need to get out of a binary understanding of evaluating people. We need to learn how to reconcile that a person is neither good nor bad. I think that's a framework that really holds us back in many ways. And then the only other thing I'll say about qualified immunity, and again, like just learning history is just so important and so important. I would encourage everyone to look up the Third Enforcement Act, also known as the KKK Act, which is directly linked to qualified immunity. And it's all right there. So I would just encourage everyone to look it up.
I just want to piggyback on Brian. I know I'm talking a lot, but that's fine. I told probably what, that the reality is that racism is not character flaw. White supremacy is not a character flaw. This is the result of living in a system that, you know, is based on whiteness. It's not a character flaw. It's implicit. And so that's something that, you know, people get really triggered, I know, when I talk about whiteness. But it's the reality of living in this system and living in the skin you live in and walking around and having access and privilege that other people don't, and justice that other people clearly don't. This isn't a character issue. It becomes a character issue when you want to double down on it. But that's not a character issue.
And we all participate in it. I just want to throw that out there. There's no one on this panel that is exclusionary from participating in white supremacy. It manifests through colorism. It manifests through our own self-worth and self-evaluation. It's a constant minefield to wade through. I raise my hand, I'll let you know I participate in this system as well. And if I can raise my hand, I would hope that everybody on this panel, or at least, the white folks that maybe, are caught in this binary evaluation of what it is to be a human being, either good or bad. Rochelle hit it right on the nose. It's not that. It's that we've all been raised and socialized under this system. We all participate. Find the ways that you are personally accountable for hitting levers to participate in the system.
Yeah, the reason I told DeMarcus I shouldn't be on this panel, because I'm a light-skinned, ambiguous Black woman who has a ton of privilege. I have a ton of privilege, and I navigate the white world so well. So, I should be passing the mic to people who have more experience than I do. But I'm here trying to speak for them. But until I started really talking about this stuff, my life was a lot easier, let me tell you, because I was doubling down on my privilege.
That's deep. That's real deep.
But you know what? I sleep better now, and I know who I am.
Sergio.
Yeah, hey, thanks. I just want to clarify something that was said, that I mentioned that I've never experienced racism, and that's not what I said. I said that I was privileged enough to grow up where the majority of people were Black and brown, so we didn't have to deal with the issues that you guys are speaking of in our communities, right? I didn't grow up in a privileged neighborhood. I didn't live I grew up in a 600 square foot apartment with both of my parents, my sister, and a whole bunch of pets, right? Like I didn't have these privileges. But the question here is qualified immunity, right? And again, I want to remind everybody why I'm here. I'm just here to kind of dialogue, right? I'm not here to take oranges and rocks. So I do agree with you. There needs to be some sort of change. What that change looks like, I don't know. And that's why we should be having a conversation. I at the end of the day, I think that we still need me as an individual, right? People ask me, well, should cops have guns? Should we take immunity away? I'm like, hey, I would be all on board with this, but let me retire. As a good cop, let me retire, right, first. Because I think there needs to be a replacement for that. And what does that look like? I don't know, right? I'm not even an educated person. I didn't go to college. I don't have a degree. I'm not a philosopher. I'm none of these things, right? All my experiences are based on just that, my life experiences through my profession and through just my personal encounters in life. I know two of you on this panel, three of you with the council member, and two of you that I know are people of color. And as a cop, we've met as cops, me being a cop, right? And there's no negative experiences that you guys have had with me, right? So I think at the end of the day, people like me, good cops, also need some sort of protection, right? But what does that look like? And that's a conversation that I'm willing to discuss. What does that look like, right? Maybe we get rid of immunity, but what are we going to replace it with, right? At the end of the day, I've made mistakes as well, right? I mean, I've stopped people who match a certain description of somebody we're looking for a serious felony, and it turns out that that person is not the person we're looking for. So technically, I've violated a Fourth Amendment right. So what protection do I have if I don't have no protection? Because at that point, like, technically, I've violated their constitutional right, and I could be charged. So, and the conversation also gets kind of tricky because there's a whole bunch of us that want different things, and there's three aspects of communicating, right? One of them is actively listening, right? And I think everybody here is actively listening, which is great. Another one is to understand that we're not going to agree on everything, right? So we're going to have to agree to disagree. And I think the third one is compromise, right? So if we achieve those three things, I think that we're being productive. I think that the other problem is that there's some people who are having the conversation that ultimately think that we should abolish the police department. I completely respect that because that's why we all have opinions. I just don't agree with that. So, somebody who grew up in a crappy part of town, I understand. I mean, I became a cop because I got pulled over 6 times in 4 days by a white cop, right? And that's what drew my interest to this. So I understand where there's biased policing. I understand where there's all these issues, but I also was able to look back and realize that there's a function that public safety plays. And that's why I became a cop, to do my part. And again, my experiences with the people of color in this panel have been positive because I, as a responsible, good human being, have taken the actions to make those encounters, right? So, you know, I think the conversation is broader than what we're having. And it's going to be really hard to have some of these conversations where some of us are saying, well, we should abolish the police department. Well, then maybe I'm the wrong person in the panel because I don't agree with that, but there needs to be changes, right? So
I like to add something, because I know we're closing out, as a closing statement to this, is that there's been a lot of, I heard both from the community council, from the work that I'm doing, and just, I want to check, can people hear me?
Yes.
Great. So there's a lot of curiosity and concern about what it is we are doing, and a lot of, I don't know, I don't have the answers, etc. But the fact of the matter is that there are people in the community.
Phoenix, you're cutting out one more time. So I'm gonna do this. I don't want to cut you off. I want to continue this conversation. Again, if you can type, can you just do a quick type in the chat, Phoenix, what you're bringing up, and I'll just say some finished words, and then
I feel like every time I talk, it just, for some reason, it goes out. It's been totally fine. I can hear everybody the whole time.
You're good now.
You're good now.
So what I'm saying is that we need.
Okay, so I'm gonna kind of wrap it up here because we are over our time. But I would like for us to continue this conversation. Everybody here was brought for a reason, because they serve a different perspective in the community that we serve, from the council member to the police officer to the local citizens, that some have not met each other, but we all function in this together. Some things that we didn't get to talk about, which you can call and email Councilmember Strauss, is about what the city is doing for defunding the police. Also, budgeting breakdown and training, and also about education, because we talk about people need to educate themselves. We need to educate. I have had to educate myself on the ideas of race, all the champions that came before me, also because that was not given to me in the education system that I was. So I think at the heart of all of this, if I would say something, is like we all need to educate ourselves about the systems and that are like holding us down, and how to structure those, and also how to train our kids. I had a conversation with one of my clients who was a 10-year-old, and he knew nothing about the Black Lives Matter movement, how that actually came about, what we were actually marching for. He knew he was marching, but he didn't really know what he was marching for. And I had to give them the difference about, like, if you're a person of color versus like if you're a white 10-year-old crossing the road, like how you might be seen as different, and how white collar crimes and misdemeanor crimes for people of color, like how those play out in the judicial system. So we cannot go any further, in my opinion, unless we fix the systems and the structures that support the ideologies, that support the criminality, that support the violence and the brutalness of killing innocent people. And like, that is what the conversation is about. It's like, you cannot take the life of an innocent person and expect to walk free, because there is no justice in that. So thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, you can follow Dan Strauss, Councilmember Dan Strauss, talk to him. Talk to Sergio if you see him on the street. If you see any of us, have a conversation. That's where it starts. So thank you all for showing up. I appreciate it so much, Phoenix. If we can get this together, you can always come to Justice for Black Lives, and we can have anybody here on the panel to talk and have a conversation with any community organizer, any individual, any citizen. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, DeMarcus. I'll just take a minute to wrap this up. I just really want to thank you, DeMarcus, and all of our presenters. I want to acknowledge that we just had a really powerful and at times uncomfortable conversation. You know, again, it's to write down, it's challenging to hear this is the case for the place I love and call home. It means that there's a lot of work that we need to do. And I have learned, I've learned a whole lot from Sergio over the last year and a half that I've known him. I've learned a lot from everyone on this panel. I have made mistakes in my life, and I will continue to work to along the pathway of allyship, which is self-education and educating neighbors. Because we have run so far over time, because this is an important conversation to have, we had planned for me to answer questions that were submitted. It does not seem that we have the time to do that. But I will be recording some videos and answering questions that have been submitted and pushing those out on social media and on the and on our newsletter. I just again want to thank all of the panelists for their vulnerability, because it's a privilege for us to hear how you feel. I'm committed to continuing this work, and this is an uncomfortable conversation, and it's a conversation that needs to be had at this historic moment in time. This is just the middle of the beginning of the conversation. We are starting down a new way of being able to have our city, our state, and our country. And our union is in a tenuous place. And it's hard. There's a lot of work to do. And I'm committed to continuing to listen to all the voices in our community and ensuring that everyone has the services provided by the city that they need to feel safe in our community. And that's for everyone. So with that, I want to thank everyone for participating. I will be addressing the questions submitted outside of this town hall, because we did receive nearly 200 questions. There's quite a bit of interest from our city. And again, I want to highlight DeMarcus. Thank you for pulling a panel together as a second step from the Juneteenth march, which is something I have never seen in all my years.
Well, you wait for it. There's going to be more. So we just need,
Well,
we need the citizens to show up, like, throw ideas, like put Black art on display, do educational things, get together, have book clubs, like all those things we can do right here in the district. And but we need people to show up for those things. And we need people to organize also with me. Like it starts with one person. I just, pool together like friends, people that I know, people that know people, to come and get together to like make a statement and make a move, and also wake up the suburbs, like get out in those streets. Don't let it stop.
Yeah. So again, thank you to everyone. Thank you to Marcus. I'll be following up with video answers to your questions for everyone who's watching on YouTube. If you want to speak to me directly, sign up for resident meetings. I do them every week. And I'm committed to continuing this conversation, continuing the work, and ensuring that we have a Seattle that works for everyone here. So thank you, District 6. I love you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, DeMarcus.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Dan.